Hola amigos, this is Level 12, and today we are back with our 8th installment of World War I Hetalia edition. Today's episode is called Revolution, and we will be discussing exactly that. In 1917, many countries were dealing with unrest in regards to both the home front and the soldiers fighting, so we are going to go from the least extreme revolutions to the most extreme, meaning a good chunk of this video will be spent talking about the last Romanovs, because I love them. So something to take note of, because it's prevalent throughout this chapter, is that every country was looking for an easy way out of the war, and the best way to do that was to turn a nation's people against its ruling power. Certain countries, mainly Britain and Germany, achieved this more than others. The reason for this was because if you could turn a country's people on the government, then the supply for workers to make munitions and willing soldiers would plummet, meaning it would be harder and harder to maintain an active front. The first country we're going to talk about is Britain, because it didn't really have a lot of striking or revolts. This was mostly because the government was very careful about seizing certain aspects of civilian life, such as factories and the media, and pushing a very war-centric ideal. In turn, it was also very wary of the needs and protests of its soldiers and its workers, and the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, did what he could to give in to those whims. He even gave in to strikes at points. Not to mention the propaganda and censoring Britain pushed. They even began censoring letters from soldiers to their loved ones so the home front wouldn't know how bad the war truly was. Outside of Britain, however, the British government was very good at stoking the fires of revolt, specifically in the Ottoman Empire. Remember in episode 4 where I said that the Ottoman Empire was far-reaching? Well, not everyone in that far-reaching empire was happy, specifically in a place called Hejaz, where the holy cities of Mecca and Medina were located. Britain spurred a revolt of the native Arabs there, and I say Arabs because that's the only description my video gave me. They sent a man named T.E. Lawrence that spoke Arabic to help push the anti-Ottoman message, and on June 5th, 1916, it actually worked. They were able to capture the city of Mecca, but Medina held on. T.E. Lawrence even orchestrated a successful train robbery, and in 4 days were able to take Aqaba. The British roped these Arabs into even more campaigns, including one involving Jerusalem, all the while promising freedom from the Ottoman Empire. However, in reality, these people were just trading one master for another. Even T.E. Lawrence felt bad for these people because he had such a good friendship with them. And I promise, this is not the end of the British being terrible. And I say this isn't the end of the British being terrible because in a battle known as the Battle of Passchendaele, the British expected 100,000 casualties in the first 48 hours. Now, this campaign was an Allied victory, but the cost was extremely high for so little gain. They exceeded the 100,000 casualties, by the way. Bloody and pointless battles like this is what eventually made the French army rebel. Now, the French are kind of laughably known for their strikes, which did happen during World War I. However, strikes didn't just happen in factories. Soldiers eventually started striking and deserting because of how horrific the conditions and battles were. The command was weak, by the way, because the government was weak, so the citizens really rallied behind the army. The battle that was the last straw for the French was known as the Nivelle Offense, which lasted from April 16th to May 9th, 1917. This was meant to be a huge breakthrough for the French into German lines, with the British backing them up. The only successful part of this mission were the Canadians at Vimy Ridge. They had tactical innovations and good munitions. Go Canada! The French, on the other hand, had so much stuff to carry that soldiers would toss their light machine guns. Their tanks carried so much gas that they would catch on fire, and by the end of the first day they lost 57 tanks. The big failure happened at a place called Chemin des Dames, where they suffered 20% casualties in the regular French division and 60% in the Senegalese division. This led to the French army going on strike and mutinying. I believe they ran into a village and started singing a French national song and just really went haywire. Luckily for the French, the Germans had no idea this was going on, so the French were quick to put a lid on this, because if the Germans had found out, trust me, they would have exploited it. I don't know what came first, but to teach the army a lesson, the French government actually would execute one soldier and parade the remaining around the dead body. They also replaced Nivelle from whatever his position was in the army with Pétain, the hero of Verdun. Pétain is credited with reforming the French army, but all he really did was give in to soldiers' demands. Which, to be fair, they should have been doing to begin with, but technically any officer could have done that. Pétain, in particular, just had such a hero image already attached to him, it was easier for the army to listen to him. Again, here we're done. The next country to talk about is Italy, and it had a very similar circumstances to France. As discussed in episode 5, Italy did not do very well against Austria-Hungary and made very little gains. This made going into the army look very unattractive and made soldiers desert in droves. It got so bad to the point where superiors were ordered to, quote, shoot all cowards on sight. Not only that, but if the army lost the battle, officers would execute every 10th man. Italian discipline went pretty hardcore. It's no wonder then that the Italians were stereotyped to surrender a lot. In 1917 alone, 300,000 soldiers surrendered to the enemy. Not only that, but they would surrender en masse, and this was really confusing to the Austro-Hungarians. Italians were happy to surrender and would break out wine and celebrate with their once enemy. One Italian prisoner of war wrote back to his family that life was better as a prisoner of war. Obviously, this was not what the Italian government wanted. It replaced the current commander of the troops, Cadorna, whatever, with a man named Diaz, who was basically just the Italian version of France's Pétain. Diaz listened to his soldiers and gave in to their demands, though I can all but guarantee that the Italians never fully recovered in World War I. The last little bit I want to cover today is Germany's meddling. As stated at the start of this video, Germany liked to entice revolution. It did so in two countries, one of them being Ireland, the other being Russia. We're going to discuss Ireland first. Just a little bit of context for this next part is that Britain had promised to give Ireland sovereignty or state rule or something like that prior to World War I even happening. I think the British were dragging their feet on that front, and when World War I happened, all plans for that kind of got shelved, which, as you might imagine, made certain people unhappy. So much so that a man, part of the Irish Volunteers, took a boat to Hamburg, Germany, and procured tons of rifles and ammunition, which he hid, by the way. Prior to World War I, Ireland was on the brink of a civil war. The common enemy kind of put an end to that. That did not mean, however, that Germany was done fanning the flames of revolution. In a plan later known as the Easter Rising, Germany had promised to send 20,000 rifles, 1 million rounds of ammo, and explosive, along with air bombing London and other attacks. Yet the Germans got cold feet on this attack, and the only deployment was stopped and intercepted by the British. So Easter Rising still happened. They continued on with their plan with very little success. The Irish, or some of the Irish, which, by the way, at this point the revolutionaries were in the minority, because many Irish saw the Germans as the enemy. Those that had accepted or expected weapons from them were seen as the enemy. Britain eventually was able to put a lid on this, but made one fatal mistake. They held public executions for the men involved. By doing this, Britain turned 16 men into martyrs. The final leg of this video is the Russian Revolution, the big cheese. Also, the part I am most familiar with because I have read and watched countless pieces of media about the Romanovs and their dynasty. So because of that, I'm going to give a quick little rundown of what led up to the revolution. So Tsar Nicholas II was a terrible ruler, we've discussed this, and by that I mean he didn't have what it took to be Tsar. His father and grandfather before him were very strong men, and Nicky just could not fill those shoes. He was very weak-willed and short and just all around kind of terrible and anti-Semitic. Not only that, but his wife was a henpecker. She really pulled all the strings with the Tsar, and that is just the beginning of why Russian people didn't like her. They hated her. She was a German princess, which, by the way, she was a German princess, but she was raised by Queen Victoria for most of her life, so whatever. So many people believe she was a spy, despite that not being true at all. She was not a spy. Also, she had a very strange relationship with a holy healer named Rasputin, who he's crazy, and gave birth to a hemophiliac son. All of this, on top of the pressure of fighting a modern war in Russia that Russia was not ready for, was a complete disaster. So something to know before I continue. At the time, Russia used the Julian calendar, while the rest of the world used the Gregorian calendar, so if some of the dates are a little different, then just keep that in mind. So the Russian home front cracked before the army did, despite the horrendous conditions of the army. And in late February, strikes and protests spread through downtown Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg. Things got so bad that Nicholas ordered soldiers to shoot upon the crowd. However, the soldiers didn't want to shoot on the civilians. They liked the people. They killed their commanding officer and joined the crowd. It's great. On March 15th, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne in both his name and his son Alexei's name. His brother Michael then takes it for less than a day before giving in to the people's demands. A weak provisional government was set up in Russia while the Romanovs lived in pretty much exile. Enter Lenin. Lenin worked with Germany to get him to Russia via going through the entirety of Germany, Sweden, then Finland, and finally entering Russia. Lenin actually struggled to get a lot of people to join his Bolshevik ideas versus what a lot of later propaganda would suggest. The Bolsheviks then stormed, in quotes, stormed the Winter Palace, though everyone inside had already left. This, along with a rigged election, puts Lenin in power under the motto of peace, land, bread, which, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think actually happened. This officially knocks Russia out of the war, and the Germans are now able to focus specifically on the Western Front. I could go on and on about the last Romanovs, but I don't want this video to be 30 minutes long. I will link plenty of Romanov-related content down below, along with an article about the Easter Uprising. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I love talking about the Romanovs, and I wanted to make so many more slides just discussing about them, but that's not really important to World War I. Also, I try and keep these to be around 20 to 25 slides, and I just didn't have the time or the slides, so rip. Anyways, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more random fandom things. Ciao, chicos.